An early out for some at HMP Brixton in South London this morning. Time off their sentence, part of the government's controversial early release scheme. A perhaps unsurprisingly popular policy move for some.
Everyone's happy that they're going home, do you know what I mean? If you get any, even a day is good for some people, do you know what I mean?
For others, though, this early taste of freedom, bittersweet.
I'm not prepared at all.
So have you got somewhere to live? Have you got...
I don't know, I've got to go there now. I need to find out what I'm doing. Everything was last minute.
Everything was last minute?
Yeah.
And how do you feel about that?
That's the way the cookie crumbles, isn't it? What am I meant to do?
All the prisoners leaving here in jails across the country today are hoping never to return. The government's relying on that if this is to work. The prisoners themselves spotting early problems.
It's disgusting in there. Rats, cockroaches.
Prisoners we've spoken to from the first time talked to us about being worried that they'd be back inside.
There's people back in already. People left 3 weeks ago and they're back in because of no help. Nothing at all.
So they left in the last
and they've come
set
back already.
And they're back already?
3 weeks. About 8 of them come back already.
And what do you make of that?
Well, obviously, it's mad, isn't it?
At the Foxton Centre in Preston, the revolving door between prison and homelessness is something they're all too familiar with. Something they say is being made worse by the early release scheme.
We didn't really appreciate how much the September releases had affected numbers here, but it's had a substantial impact on us, and it'll be interesting to kind of know what happens this time around. It's okay, releasing people early to lift some of the pressure in the jails, but it's not acceptable if it's just transferred out into the community for organisations like us to pick up.
Jeff says the centre is already struggling to help men like Mark. A history of short sentences and a long-standing problem with drugs, Mark says the one thing he needs to stay out of jail seems the hardest to get.
Somewhere to live. Otherwise, it's just back to square one using again, is it? So, or jail.
The government's known from the beginning this is a risky strategy. Freeing prisoners early, not an easy sell with much of the public. Not helped by pictures of offenders popping corks and partying outside prison gates when the first set of releases happened last month. There were reports that dozens of prisoners not eligible for the scheme were incorrectly released. That one offender allegedly sexually assaulted a woman within an hour of being freed. And hundreds of prisoners were not fitted with the electronic tags which were a condition of being let out early. The government knows early release buys them time, but months rather than years. And letting people out of prison may not be enough. Stopping people going in is also part of their equation. So today, the Justice Secretary announced a wholesale review of sentencing.
We cannot build our way out of this problem. Now, let me be clear. There will always be a place for prison, and there will always be offenders who must be locked up. But we must also expand the range of punishments that we use outside of prison.
But more measures outside prison, at the same time as a firm commitment to build 14,000 more prison places, leave some campaigners concerned.
I suspect the government will try and muddle through by doing both, but it's very difficult. I mean, we'll see what the budget brings for the Ministry of Justice, but it is certainly true that the billions that are being spent on building new prisons could be better spent, I think, on strengthening the provision in existing prisons and particularly rebuilding and strengthening the probation service, which is absolutely crucial.
Freeing up space in the prison system, as the government repeated today, was an emergency measure they're determined not to repeat. Other longer-term solutions will not be quick. And what happens in the meantime will be critical. Well, earlier I spoke to the Justice Minister, Heidi Alexander, and began by asking her how comfortable she is with the high-risk strategy of the early release of prisoners.
It wasn't a decision that we wanted to take, but if we don't have space in the prisons, then courts can't run trials and police can't make arrests, and so the alternative didn't bear thinking about.
But I mean, you've had, as I'm sure you've seen today, and the first set of early releases, you had prisoners popping corks, celebrating outside jails. A prisoner today saying, "Big up Keir Starmer." I mean, that is not helping a government look like it's as tough on crime as its predecessor, is it?
So we're very clear that if you commit a crime in this country, there will be consequences, and we are committed to building 14,000 new prison places. We are committed to that, and we're clear that for the most dangerous offenders who get a custodial sentence, that we can never again be in a position where there are questions about whether prison spaces will be available.
You can look at what the Justice Secretary today said and feel that it's not really a very coherent strategy. As you say, you know, you are committed to building more prisons. She said in the Commons today, this must begin with building more prisons, then promptly said, we can't build our way out of this. Now, we know you've got a prisons minister who believes only a third of prisoners should be in jail. There's an argument that you're trying to ride both horses here and that this is not a coherent strategy.
I think it is entirely coherent, to be honest, because at the moment the prison population goes up by 4,500 a year. In order to keep pace with demand, we would have to be building 3 mega prisons every year. So this was never going to be a long-term solution, the early release of prisoners.
You still intend to fill spaces. You still intend to create 14,000 prison spaces at the same time as arguing we need to be smarter about who we're sending to prison.
I think both of those things can be true at the same time. You have to have the prison spaces available for the demand that is coming into our courts and prison system, but we also need to get better at reducing reoffending.
But just to be clear, you're not really very confident about dramatically reducing the prison population if you are in fact committed to creating 14,000 more spaces, I suppose is my point.
So on the current trajectories, we know that we have to build additional prison places, and it would be totally irresponsible for any government not to construct those prison places. But we know that will never be enough in and of itself. Hence, we need to be smarter about who we are sending to prison. It's also the case that we know that when people are given a community sentence, that actually the rate of reoffending associated with those community sentences is less than if you're given a custodial sentence.
I mean, as you say, you've talked today about extending home curfew, more use of tagging. Are you worried that the public will just say this is Labour being weak on crime?
No, we're very clear that the sentences that people are given need to command the confidence of communities and need to have the confidence of victims. I think people in this country are interested in what works. We have the highest incarceration rate in Western Europe, and we have reoffending levels that are too high. 8 out of 10 offenders are reoffenders. So it's clear that our prisons at the moment are creating better criminals, not better citizens. And so that's why we need to look at this issue in the round. And public protection and public safety will always be our top priority.
Heidi Alexander, thank you very much for talking to us today. Thank you.
Thank you.